Today we're diving into one of the biggest turning points in modern history. It's a story all about power, religion, and how one of the most brilliant generals of all time cooked up a seriously risky plan to fix his broken country. Yeah, we're talking about Napoleon Bonaparte and his incredible deal with the Pope.
So let's put ourselves in his shoes for a second. Imagine you're Napoleon. You've just taken over France, a nation that's been completely torn apart by years of revolution. What's your first move to try and heal the country? Well, Napoleon's idea was both genius and totally gutsy. He decided to cut a deal with the one person who stood for everything the revolution tried to destroy, the Pope.
Now, to really get why this deal was so important, we have to look at just how much of a mess France was in. You see, the French Revolution wasn't just about getting rid of the king. It was a full-on attack against the Catholic Church, which the revolutionaries saw as part of the corrupt old system they wanted to burn to the ground.
And when I say attack, I mean it. The crackdown was brutal. Priests were hunted down, forced into exile, or even executed. Beautiful, historic churches were shut down, their bells silenced, and they were used as warehouses or even stables. Religious holidays? Banned. For the average person, this created a life filled with fear. Simple things like baptizing your baby or having a proper funeral were suddenly against the law.
Now, Napoleon, being a master strategist, looked at all this chaos, and he didn't see a religious problem, he saw a political one. He wasn't a very religious guy himself. For him, this was all about power. He knew that a divided nation is a weak nation, and the people were just exhausted. If he wanted to make France stable, he had to make peace with the church.
So what does he do? He sets up one of the most fascinating negotiations in all of history. On one side of the table, we have Napoleon Bonaparte, the most powerful general in Europe, and on the other, Pope Pius VII, the leader of the entire Catholic Church. These two guys were on a total collision course, and the future of France was hanging right there in the balance. And they both wanted completely different things. Napoleon wanted a stable, unified France that he, and only he, could control. That would secure his power. The Pope, on the other hand, wanted to save the church in France from being wiped out, let people worship freely again, and get back some of his lost influence. They were total rivals, but they both realized something crucial. They needed each other.
So after months of secret meetings and some really intense arguments back and forth in Paris, their teams finally hammered out a historic agreement. It's known to history as the Concord of 1801.
So what in the world is a Concordat? I know it sounds super technical, but the idea is actually pretty simple. It's a formal agreement, kind of like a treaty, but it's specifically between the Pope, acting as the head of the church, and a nation's government. It's basically the official rulebook for how they're going to get along. At its core, this deal was one giant compromise. Neither Napoleon nor the Pope got everything they wanted, not by a long shot. But they both walked away with something big. So let's break down exactly what each side gave up and what they got. Okay, first up, the land. The Pope had to give up something huge. He agreed that the church would never get back all the property that was stolen from it during the Revolution. This was a massive deal, because it prevented a new civil war over who owned what. In return, Napoleon gave the Pope a symbolic win. He officially recognized Catholicism not as the only religion, but as the religion of the great majority of French citizens. But what about who would lead the church? Who would pick the bishops? This is where they got really clever. The deal was that Napoleon got the power to nominate the new bishops. This meant he could pick guys who were loyal to him. But the Pope kept the final religious authority to officially approve them and put them in their jobs. So the state had control, but it came with the church's official blessing. And just to make it crystal clear who was really in charge, every single priest and bishop had to swear a new formal oath of loyalty directly to the French government. They even had to promise to report any plots they heard about that could harm the state. So in reality, the clergy kind of became employees of Napoleon. And the final piece of the puzzle that sealed Napoleon's control? Money. Since the church had lost all its land, it had no way to pay its priests. So the government stepped in and put them all on the state payroll. This was necessary, sure, but it also gave Napoleon the ultimate trump card. Because, let's be honest, if the government pays your salary, who do you really work for?
So, what did all this actually mean for the average person living their life in France? Well, the impact was immediate and it was dramatic. This Concordat didn't just change some laws on paper, it changed the actual sights and sounds of daily life all across the country.
I mean, this timeline says it all. The Concordat was the pivot point.
All the chaos and fear of the revolutionary years started to fade away, replaced by a new sense of order after the deal became public in 1802.
For the first time in years, people heard church bells ringing again. Churches were cleaned up and reopened for services. Families could finally have their children baptized legally and hold proper Christian funerals for loved ones. Even Sunday became an official day of rest again. It was this incredible return to normalcy.
But, and this is a huge but, there was a catch, a big one. Yes, religion was back, but this was not the same powerful independent church from before the revolution. The price of its survival was control. The state, led by Napoleon, now had its hands in everything, supervising who became a bishop and even what was said from the pulpit on Sunday. So that brings us to the big question. Why are we still talking about this 200-year-old document? Well, because its impact was absolutely enormous, and it lasted for a really, really long time. Think about this. The Concordat of 1801 wasn't some temporary patch. It defined the relationship between church and state in France for more than a century. It outlasted Napoleon, it outlasted kings who came after him, and it survived several more revolutions. It was an incredibly tough political solution. And its influence spread way beyond France. Other countries all over Europe looked at what Napoleon did and saw it as a model. It was viewed as this masterpiece of political diplomacy, a blueprint for how a modern government could work with, and more importantly, control an ancient religious power. But that central tension, right, the tug of war between the power of the state and the power of the church, that never really went away. And finally, over 100 years later, in 1905, France passed a new law that officially separated church and state once and for all, bringing the long era of Napoleon's Concordat to a close. And that leaves us with a fundamental question that Napoleon's deal forces us to think about, a question that countries all over the world still debate today. Is it better for a government to manage religion to keep things stable, or should church and state be kept totally, completely separate? There's still no easy answer to that one.